Good morning, audience. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Anish Khadia. I am the Chief Business Officer of Italite, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, maybe a quick word about Italite. Italite is a platform that makes travel bookings and payments easier for a host of companies, including several healthcare staffing companies. This is our third webinar focused on the healthcare staffing space. And through our webinar today, I hope to share some very interesting insights with you and also get you to talk to one of the leaders in the space in Todd. Before I introduce Todd and get him to talk about his journey through the healthcare staffing space, here are some interesting nuggets for you to munch over. I know it is close to lunchtime, so these definitely hopes these points should be exciting for you to know. Our topic for the day is how locum staffing companies are taking the healthcare space by storm. Why do we believe that? In 2023, the healthcare staffing space or the locum staffing space grew by 12%. Now, this is in an economy which was not growing or growing at a very, very low rate. And what's more, even in 2024, the locum staffing space is expected to grow by about 7% in the States. Right now, this is one of the estimates. I'll definitely get Todd to talk through his estimate, and I know he is even more bullish about this space. Now, what's got everyone's attention on this space? If one looks at the population of people in the States that's above 65 years of age, that population was about 40 million people back in 2010, grew to about 56 million people in 2020. That's a growth rate of about 38% over a 10-year period. And in more than a century, that's the fastest this particular population set within within the states has grown. Now, why is that important? Right? We all know as we grow older, right, the need for healthcare always increases. And this is leading to overall, more need for hospitals and doctors. But we are not, as United States, we don't have enough doctors joining the workforce. Right? By all estimates, the physician shortage in the United States is expected to be about 124,000 physicians come 2034. And this imbalance of demand and supply is where locum staffing companies step in. Right? They help fulfill some of these gaps and also help communities that are not as urban get access to high quality physicians and healthcare. Right? So I hope some of these data points help you understand the space better and why this is super critical. To tell you more about this space and why this is something that not just medical staffing companies but staffing companies overall are looking at and are looking at with a lot of seriousness. I have today Todd Thieschafer as my guest today. Todd is the Director of Locums at Recruiting Resources, the top medical staffing agency in North and South Dakota. Todd also is a seasoned professional, has worked for more than 15 years in the staffing industry in a variety of roles. Todd, welcome to our webinar today. Excited to have you talk to our audience. But to get started, we'd love to know more about you and your professional journey.
Thanks so much, Anish. Super great to be here. Really excited to kind of talk through my journey. And my journey, again, Todd Thieschafer, Director of Locums, Unity Med Recruiting Resources. Again, been with in the industry since 2015. I kind of have a unique journey where I started out in the retail staffing world, or the retail space. So where did I go from starting in the retail staffing space to becoming a director of locums in the healthcare staffing world. There's a lot of similarities. So kind of going back to my early days as a store manager for the Buckle, one of the things that happened in those chains is it was a high experience of customer experience, as well as always be recruiting. And that really started my journey of knowing that I loved what happens when you connect the right person to the right job. And how can I make that into something I'm doing in a retail setting to creating that for a career in itself? And that's really where I fell in love with it and got connected with a company doing nurse practitioner or advanced practice recruiting. And that was back in 2015. So from there, it was a wake call, going from straight from working retail where your sales are almost instantaneous, you get instant gratification, to probably one of the hardest positions of recruiting, which is advanced practice, which is a multi-month life cycle, not just this person's in for a few minutes and we're taking care of it. So it was definitely an adjustment, but it was something that you realize was a lot more fulfilling. And that's where it started to grow my love. So I went from advanced practice recruiting. I did a few years in travel nurse recruiting as well. And then for the better part of the COVID time, I worked for a company doing business development for contracts, both direct contracts as well as government contracts. And then was blessed to be recruited over to the recruiting resources team. So over at Recruiting Resources, the thing that drew me into them was they've been around for 20 plus years, mainly in the anesthesia world. And it just looked like an opportunity that they've created such a great foundation for me to be able to keep on growing and building on an already growing industry. So as we'll allude to, and what you already alluded to, is the industry on the travel nursing and allied side took a steep cut recently, and it's been trending down, if not flat, depending on the specialty. But on the locum side, it is going and it's continuing to rise. So it's just a really, really good space to be in, and that's where I got to where I am today.
Which brings me to my first question for you today, Todd. Now we know several companies have been looking at the locum staffing space, right? But when you're in the boardroom, when you're thinking about this space, right, what are the 2 or 3 key KPIs that have got you excited?
The KPIs that get us excited about going into the locum space.
Yes.
I mean, really, you look at the growth. You look at what can I do to maintain, especially with a lot of these companies that are seeing that downward trend, or they're seeing that flat. So, what really gets us going? Well, looking at locums is based off some of the statistics that I read, up over 25% compared to last year. Nursing and allied is trending down. They're about 3 times as much in terms of profitability. So when you're looking at one placement on the locum side is equal to 3 placements on the nursing or allied side. And that's such a monumental thing to say, we can really divest into get into this and really see monumental growth with less, which means that if you push harder, you're going to have, better growth and better outcomes and a little bit more leeway with the teams that you can hire on. And I think for the most part, the other thing that is really nice on the locum space is it's a niche market. So when you look at how many companies that you're competing against as of right now, you can really look at it and say, okay, if I jump in and I dive into this fully, I'm going to have a better market share advantage versus just staying in the nursing and allied space. So the number of companies that do not do locums, especially in our Omaha Midwest area, is minuscule to not. I think everyone's just dabbling and trying. So those ones that are really jumping in fully, or they've been around quite some time, they do have that bigger market share, and it's just really, really enticing.
Got it. I see that one of our audience members seem to have a question. Now, usually we take questions at the end, but I think given that Todd's just started, we definitely would love to take the question. I suppose the question's from Dwight. Dwight, if you could type out your question in the chat. We'd be happy to take that. So Todd, very interesting question. In fact, this was a question on my mind as well. Let's say there is, and there are two sides to this question. Let's say there's a company in the travel nursing space who wants to get into the locum staffing space, right? What would the three steps you would recommend to them, right? How should they even start the journey, right? And then my question was more, there are very few industries that can claim they are growing 25%. It means that someone who joins this industry also has hope to grow professionally, quite like you have in your 9 years here. So, my question, and I'll combine it with Dwight's question. The question number one, for a company looking to get into the space, right? What would you say, right? They should be thinking about as their first three things. And second, if there is a person who wants to get into the space, become a sales rep, become an operations rep here, right? Then what would you recommend to them?
Absolutely. I'm gonna start on the opposite side, the second question that you had, because that's how I actually wrote it out in my notes here. So it flows fairly well. So really, for somebody that wants to get into this industry right now, especially if they want to be a sales rep, they want to get into something that's growing, is it's a growing industry, the healthcare staffing in general. Even with the declines, it's still way up from what it has been in years past. What you're going to find out is that also very, very saturated. So if you want to know that there's one thing that you have to do is to be truly successful in the field, is to acknowledge that this position is not an 8 to 5 job. It's not just in, you are working with providers that are working 12-hour shifts or working 8-hour shifts. They're working probably at the same time that you're working, and they may have the time off outside. So you have to adapt in communication, and you have to have the mindset that I am going to prioritize them. These are, we've always said this, and we mean it in a very positive way, but people are a product, and people are all over the place in terms of where they feel and where their emotions are. And we have to be able to prioritize where they're at and when they want to have a conversation, communication, and also adapt to what they want to be communicated through. So that could be through text or emails or calls. But that goes into my next point, is this is a very high effort, KPI driven industry. So it's really easy to get lost in the metrics. How many calls are you making per day? How many outreaches? How many touches? How long are you on the phone to? And so it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work, and it takes mindfulness. And one thing that I really try to dive in and push into the team is that these are key indicators to help grow, but we have to be mindful, because as you go into it, that the KPIs are just there for a roadmap. It's not, you always have to know, what is the purpose of what I'm doing every single time. So the purpose isn't to make 100 dials in the day. The purpose is it may take up to 100 dials to get somebody on the phone. So don't care about the metrics. We do care about the effort, but we care about what the outcome is. And with that being said, is always be ready to perform. So this is a performance-based job. And part of that performance is, as you're making dials, as you're going through stuff, you can't be surprised if somebody answers the phone. You can't be surprised if somebody, jumps on a question, because that happens a lot. You just get in tune and you've made 75 dials and you've been on the phone for a few hours with no luck, and then somebody's interested. So just always know that you have to be at the top of your performance at every communication that you have. And you always have to remember that sales is not random. So you have a roadmap, have an idea, learn all of the things that you can about the industry and about the profession that you're recruiting on, but always know that there is a next step. It's not going to just randomly come into the success that you have, it'll jump into something else, which also is my last point is on that side, don't take things personal. This is a job that is repetitive. There's more no's than there are yeses. It's the law of average. So you'll be seen almost as a telemarketer at times, and just realize that the purpose of what you're doing is to help communities. It's to help facilities. It's to help the hospitals or any facet of their job and where they impact in the residents. Your job is to help them out. So if you always know that top of mind, that's what you're looking for, that's going to help quite a bit. And I think that's kind of the key points in terms of it's a simple job, but it's not an easy job, and you have to go in with the right mindset.
Those are excellent points, and I'm sure this is valuable to to a host of people in our audience.
Yep.
I do want to circle back to Dwight's question, and
Yep.
He added some interesting flavor to the question. Now, one of the reasons he stayed out of the space was because of the long gestation period. It's not a short cycle to place a candidate. Right now, with that, being a challenge, how are you overcoming that?
Yeah. And that's such a great question, because I know that it is really tough when you're looking at a life cycle that if I get on the phone with a CNA today, I might be able to place them this week and have them start by next week, depending on what those credentials look like. If I get on the phone with a CRNA on a typical life cycle of me, if I am even able to get them placed in the next week or two, it'll take at least 30 days if I'm really, really lucky, or 60 to 90 days until they can start. And so that life cycle is tough. And so one of the things that I've always talked about is understand, especially coming from a higher level, that this is a marathon. It's not a race. You're not going to have the success that you're going to have in any of the other divisions that you may have, whether it's long-term care, nursing, or allied. So you have to give yourself room to allow for that growth to happen. But if you want to help circumvent that and make that a quicker process, look for people within the industry already. Find people that are looking for a change and really invest in them to invest in the company. So it's not just an investment, whether it's a dollar wise, but it could be an investment in time, and just knowing that this is something that will take time to grow. Another piece of that too is you do have to invest the time to understand. So while being innovative is key, you want to stand out from everyone else that's in the industry. There's also non-negotiables that providers are accustomed to. So locum providers appreciate and expect a level of continuity. And until you can fully grasp what that looks like, you need to see what agencies you can replicate. And a lot of times it could be twofold. As I mentioned earlier, it could be from people that you bring into the company with experience, or I always talked about grow where you are planted. So if you're already in the healthcare field, you're, especially on the staffing side, you probably have contracts with facilities and direct contracts with other hospitals that may use locums. So since you haven't been diving into there, go and have those conversations with the partners that you already have and see what that looks like. Ask them those questions. They want the help. They need the help right now. So they're not trying to just block you out. You're already connected with them. So ask what that looks like. What do they typically pay? What do those rates look like? How's the reimbursement? Do they typically pay and bill this way? What do they want to see, and how do they want to see it? So be really firm with what you want to do and what your goals are. Be realistic of the time frame, but don't dabble. I think that's the hardest part. And everyone that's failed within the Omaha area that I've been in contact, they've dabbled. And when you dabble, you're just not going to see the success. You really have to fully engage. And again, just grow where you're planted when possible, hire from within the industry. And I think that's some of the key things that if I were to grow brand new, that's probably what I would start with first.
That's such a wonderful thought. And this is something that I can say holds across industries, where whenever you are trying something new, the best approach, at least I have seen as well, is to grow with your customer. go get more wallet share from your customer. If you're on the nursing side, have the conversations around the locum side, and that's exactly what Todd said, right? And then see if the customer is open minded about using you for the locum staffing side as well, right? So
Yes.
great thought, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thank you. And just a little bit of expansion on that too, is there's so much to be said about just asking your providers what they're looking for and what they expect too. So don't just rely on the client side, but as you dump into this and you're trying to figure out, is it chicken or the egg? Which one am I going for first? I mean, it can be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but you can get so much valuable information from locum providers that have already been doing this for years. They know where the contracts are. They know what they expect. They know what they've had happen in the past, and not every place has been the same. So you can gain information from the people that you're trying to work with.
Got it. Now, that brings me to an interesting point that I'd heard even from the speakers we've had here earlier. For a company to successfully create a locum staffing practice, one of the key ingredients is managing the locums experience, right? The experience of physicians and doctors very closely. You are building out a fast growing practice. Um, what do you think about that, right? What can companies do, if you're a locum staffing company or if you're a locum staffing practice? How do you create a great experience for a locum?
Yeah, and that question also goes back to a lot of the things that I was just talking about, which kind of jumped the gun a little bit on that side. But going back to my last thing that I just said, understand what the expectations are from the providers. Have those conversations, have real conversations with people that you're trying to reach out to. There's plenty of databases, there's plenty of like the doc cafes and different places that you can go to search for candidates. Once you get those candidates on the phone and you have conversations with them, what is their expectation? They're okay with telling you because they demand that stuff. So I think that's huge. Another piece is, as you're having conversations, again, going back with grow where you're planted, that alludes back to that same point, is find what every other agency has been doing. They've been working with agencies sometimes for 20, 30 years. So what is that typical realm that they're looking for? So is it in terms of scheduling? There's the difference between, if you're in the travel staffing world, you're so used to 13-week contracts, 26-week contracts, maybe shorter, but it's one of those things where what's the expectations? Because when you talk about locums, a lot of times what comes to mind is PRN as well, and just filling in gaps. And there's a lot of companies that just work with, okay, let me staff these shifts as they come up. And there's other companies that really focus on, I just want long-term contracts that keep people employed. So understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and as well what your facility and your provider are trying to accomplish at the same time. So will you divest? Will you jump into just the short term? Will you jump into just the long term? Or will you do a healthy mix of both? And that's to your strategy that you have to create. Yeah.
Yeah, these are excellent points from our own experience as a travel and payments company. One of the other things, and this is a very, individual thing, locums are away from, their families quite often, right? And for extended periods of time. Another part that I've heard both from doctors and from locum staffing companies is, how do we make this whole travel comfortable? A lot of us who don't travel as often think travel is very glamorous. But then from there, when you're away from your family for 4 weeks or 13 weeks or 26 weeks, it can become taxing. So just taking care of that is also one of the elements that's important to pay attention to. But just as Todd said, the best thing you can do if you're getting started is to actually go and talk to providers and see what their perspective is.
Yes. No, I love that, because that's such a key component that sometimes we miss out on. And providers, just like anyone else, they're all human beings. And as a human, as they travel, they're away from family. It doesn't matter if it's a CNA and it doesn't matter if it's a CEO. These people like communications, conversations, just like we do. They want to be heard. They want to be recognized for the efforts and the stuff that they're doing outside of just their job. So when you're talking about a 2 or 3 or 4 hour drive that somebody has to do, or spending countless hours every single week within the airports, how can we be more of a white glove service to those? Invest a little bit into how can we make sure that that's as seamless as possible, because that's tough when you have flight issues, when you have hotel issues. I was just dealing with a hotel issue this morning because of graduations and other things that are happening in these smaller towns. By having a team that specializes just to help with their travel accommodations, that just really helps smooth that process, because you will work against larger companies that have been doing this for years, that have a dedicated travel company that just takes care of that stuff. So you have to jump into here and say, okay, I have to roll up my sleeves and I have to do a little bit more than what I've typically done in the past, because it's not always, here's the first week, you're going to fly in here, and here's 13 weeks later, you're going to fly back. This could be every other week. It could be once a week. It could be once a month that they're going back and forth. So really just understanding their needs. And if this was your family member and they were stressed on this side, what could we do to make sure that they feel super comfortable and they are floored by the service that you can provide?
I think there are so many nuggets of wisdom that I am taking away from this conversation. I'm sure our audience also likes that. Now we are near the top of the half hour that we had budgeted for our conversation. But I have two very important questions for you that I think our audience will benefit from. My first question is, how do you see the sector evolving? Right? Nursing went through an amazing high back in 2020 and 2021, right? And it's shrunk over the last couple of years, right? How do you see the locum space, right? If one takes a 3-year view, then how do you see it changing?
Yeah, absolutely. I see, because of the transition, the trends, and a lot of the companies are going through layoffs right now. Unfortunately, they're trying to figure out how can they protect their family, how can they protect the company, and you're going to see a lot of people and a lot of companies that are investing into the locum space. So you're going to see a lot more penetration into that by staffing companies that have either been around for a long time, or they're trying to stay afloat because maybe they jumped in during the COVID market. What happens with that too is, with more companies comes more calls into facilities. There comes more, outreach, and sometimes more contracts. And hospitals, as much as they like to work on that side, they also want to simplify that because they're trying to save money too. So one thing you'll also see is a lot more VMSs and MSPs. So that come into this market. They're more prevalent in the locum space. And I think what that's going to happen is, you're going to have these companies that have been around for years that go, I only work direct. That's what I do. I'm not going to work through a system. And you're going to realize that hospitals can't always maintain that, and they will look for simpler things. And you have to realize, am I going to strategically move around the VMSs and MSPs and not work with them? Or do I put that into my strategy to say, how can I still build business and how can I grow? And that goes back into Dwight's question, is how do you get into it too? Another thing is that strategy of a VMS and MSP where you can jump in and have instant access. If you have a smaller company, you don't have the time to market. If you can get access to a VMS, you can have instantaneous access to a lot of jobs that you can start working on. So that way you can invest in other parts of the company as well to keep on growing.
Excellent point. Final question before I hand it over to our audience. The last 30 minutes have been, you've made some very, very great points. If you were to capture these in 3 bullet points that people should remember out of this conversation, right, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, there might be 4, but I'll try to. So one of the main ones, if you're looking to transition into healthcare staffing, keep in mind it's an extremely rewarding yet challenging industry. You'll get out of it what you put into it. So it is tough, but it's definitely rewarding. As we continue into 2024 and 2025, locums will continue to be an opportunity of growth for any company looking to expand their portfolio. You'll be successful by investing the time and resources into a dedicated locums team. I truly believe that. Also, in order to not compromise the locum experience, you have to have a provider first mindset. Always ask yourself how you can differentiate yourself from other staffing companies while also feeling familiar by understanding what their needs are, as well as the client's needs. And then for those within the industry, embrace change, be intentional on how you want to grow, especially when looking to take on new business, maintaining your current clients, and create a growth strategy that does have to involve the discussion around VMS and MSPs, and does it align with your company's goals.
Super. So Todd, thank you very much for giving us your precious time and sharing such insights with us and our audience. This is the time where you can ask your questions. I definitely took Dwight's question up, but if you have more questions, Todd and I will be happy to answer.
So I do see Dwight's question about the larger agencies, and I'd like to pivot from that, because the thing about that, Dwight, is we're actually not a larger company. We are just an established company. So when you look at the grand scheme of things, we have a fairly small group that works all of our jobs, that have been doing this, and they've been doing it for 20 years. And I can tell you that one of those things that you have to do is you just have to dive in and jump in and create good customer service and have somebody for every need that you see. So the best way to be able to jump into there for a smaller agency is it can happen. Maybe you specialize. And that's one thing that they really did well prior to my time being here, is we were an anesthesia only company, and anesthesia is the hot commodity. So if you want to be the superhero for any, these places are still struggling. So they need somebody. And we wouldn't be here, we wouldn't see the growth if they didn't still have needs, which means that you have that opportunity to jump in and be a differentiator. So specialize, find the place that has the needs, and just work that need until it's filled.
All right, Dwight, I hope that answers your question. Todd, one more interesting question for someone just getting started, or someone who's early into this journey, right? What are some potholes to avoid or to watch out for?
I think one of the biggest fallbacks that companies, and I've seen this happen, is the need to have all of the information and the need to know everything before you make a call or a conversation, whether it's with a client or a provider. Be okay to fail forward. It's growth, it's understanding. Be transparent. So have conversations. Everyone has their own mentality. Some people want to fake that they know everything. I've always been in the mentality of just saying, when I was new in the industry, I said, I'm new to this. Explain to me XYZ, or explain to me X, this. And this is the healthcare industry. They're here to help. So it's one of those things that push people outside their comfort zone. And that's the hardest thing, is you have to take the leap. If you don't, you're never going to learn anything. That's probably one of the biggest things that I see. The other side is, if you join a VMS or an MSP, if you join some of these other sides, is you can get lost in the jobs. Really figure out how you can be just uber focused, whether that's on types of positions or maybe a facility, and get really good at that. So going back to my initial, grow where you're planted, plant somewhere and say, I'm going to get really, really great at this. I'm not going to be a jack of all trades, which a lot of us like to do, but at the same time, I'm going to be super good. So they will know if I need somebody in, a surgical physician, they're going to go to you because they know that you're going to deliver. So be intentional with what you're going to do and dive right in. Don't get lost in the mess.
Wonderful thought. And with that, I come to our final question for the day. I know we are, quite a bit above time, but I'll take the final question, and that's related to provider attrition. Todd, do you see a provider attrition problem today in the industry, and how are companies navigating that?
Um, I mean, you're seeing a lot of issues in terms of. Uh, I think I was looking at something earlier where a lot of the younger providers are starting to do more locums, and the experience is really tough. You're seeing a piece where the providers that are here today, I think we're going to lose 20% in the next few years, and then another 20% after that, because we just have a very older population of physicians. On top of that, people are living longer, which means that they're sicker. So there's one of these things that we're losing physicians. We're gaining growth in terms of, I think it was last I looked, it was 40%, might have been a few years ago, of the growth of who is going to medical school, but that's not going to survive the growth that we're having. So everyone's getting spread in quite, everyone's being spread quite thin in terms of the physician side. We're losing them, and then at the same time, they're leaving the profession, whether of age or outside. So it's just a different world and a different market. I don't know if I answered your question on that one, Anish, but um,
You answered one portion of it, which is overall provider attrition. Now, the other thing I see is the from a provider's lens, this is almost like Uber and Lyft, right? you know given the interest of locum staffing companies in the space, and more staffing companies in the space, a provider has multiple partners or staffing agencies they could go to, right? Do you see that as a challenge, or do you see providers stick around with one or two companies they build confidence in?
I think you're going to see both because it will be what the goal of that provider is. So if that provider wants comfortability and sustainability and that continuity of what it feels like for one agency, they're going to do that because it's great. That's where we saw a lot of success. We've had providers that have been around for 10 plus years, and that's one of those things where locums too. I've talked to other companies that they had a provider on locum for 20 years, and so there's one of those things that if they feel comfortable, it's like their main job is what they're doing, and it's usually at the same facility for years to come. On the other side of it, a lot of providers that we've talked to, they're money hungry. And how do you get more money? Well, you navigate and you set people against each other, just like you would in a car business where you're seeing cars and you're seeing who's going to sell it to you at a better price. If that person only cares, that provider only cares about the dollars at the end of the day, you're going to see a lot more people that jump around. Plus, a new company, let's say Dwight starts his own company and does that, he's not going to have all the contracts that somebody else will. So there's going to be jumping because of opportunity that they have. And as that's more prevalent, you're going to see that they do like service, especially the white glove service from a small company, but they love the opportunities of a larger company that's been around for a long time. So you're going to have a good balance of both. It just depends on what you go after and how that you build that relationship.
Super. These are audience were some very wonderful insights. I hope you've derived a lot of value out of our session today. I'm sure we can keep on taking your questions and telling you about the space and Todd's wonderful insights. Should you have some more questions, feel free to drop us a line. We'll send you a thank you note, and you can respond back with some questions for Todd. We'll definitely collate them and send them Todd's way, and you can pick on his brain some more. But thanks a ton for being a wonderful audience. I see questions popping up in Q&A, but given that we are way over time, and I'm sure there are other engagements that Todd needs to attend to. So on your behalf, let me thank Todd for making time for us, and giving us a wonderful peek into this exciting world of locum stuff.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Anish. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure as well, Todd. Have a good day. Have
You
a good
too.
day, our audience.